And I've clung to it. I became addicted to it. I became addicted to, it's just about the work. This threshold stuff, if I keep doing it, it's just about the work. I'm not saying it doesn't work for everybody. I'm just saying, threshold. I'm just telling you that I've tried it and done it and repeated almost the same patterns a few times now, and it's not getting the results out of me that I've previously been able to achieve doing less time at altitude, doing less mileage. The guys that are doing the threshold stuff well, the guys that are achieving success doing this threshold work, they're still once per week doing really hard VO2 max efforts on Saturdays or whatever day per week that they pick that specific hard day. That's what people need to be talking about, not the threshold stuff that's building this foundation. It's the VO2 work that once a week pushing really hard, that's pushing your ceiling higher and pulling you up towards that sort of race potential. As you neglect that VO2 stuff, that max stuff, you're just dropping down, 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 closer to falling back on wherever your foundation is. So if you haven't raced lately or ever at all and felt, just like the race feels like hard work, that you're trying to push, you're trying to sort of run it, whether it's the goal pace that you'd like or you're trying to keep up with the group, mid-race that you've tried to sort of like attach yourself to, and you just find that it's hard work. You just find that just trying to get the body to, go in that direction, to move at that pace, it just feels like hard work. And it's frustrating because, when you've trained or when you've been pushing and training, it hasn't felt that way. And so you're frustrated because naturally it's like, what is going on here? This is not how it felt a week ago. This is not how it felt 10 days ago, 2 months ago. And suddenly then on race day, it just feels labored. That's probably how I've felt in a lot of, races lately. And it's not always how it's been. And the reason I'm telling you that is because I've started probably pushing a bit more in training, and I've probably adapted the attitude of, sorry for the bluntness, but, this threshold stuff all the time, and see getting back to just pushing and almost like making sure that at least once a week, maybe twice a week, you're in that like uncomfortable state in training. Well, then I think for sure as shit, when it comes to that next race and you're, being asked the question to push a little bit, well, the body and brain, it's going to be able to respond because you've been practicing that uncomfortable rhythm, that pushing when you don't really feel like it, when you have to like refocus, when you have to recompose yourself, because naturally you just want to slow things down. The last few sessions that I've done, I was in Flagstaff, Arizona. I got the teeth pulled that had probably hindered a lot of the London build-up. That's gone. So the excuses are gone. And now it's like, now you have permission to work. Now you don't need to control the lactate. Now you don't need to control the effort levels. But then with that comes, but that's harder. But I'm not here to preach that, threshold isn't important. I'm not here to preach that, you do need to build a foundation. You do need to build layers and layers of fitness. But it's almost like if you're not doing something pretty hard in training, once a week, possibly twice a week, your body physically, your physiology, and your psychology, they're going to find it very difficult on race day when suddenly you're asking them to do something they're not capable of doing. So the role of the foundation, the steady runs, the threshold stuff, you're building a layer, you're building this very bottom. Like if we picture a pyramid, right? This whole bottom layer is going to be your foundation. That's your steady state stuff. That's your threshold work. And that's where you're building, this foundation. And as your foundation then gets a little bit higher, so does your, probably we could name it your racing potential. But while you're building that sort of foundation, it's still only potential. So the more of that stuff you do, likely the more potential you have to race well. But the problem is that in order to build your pyramid almost upward and get closer to that, really good race potential, you do need to do the harder training. We're talking about VO2 max efforts. We're talking about 5K effort sessions. We're talking about, maybe doing like, instead of where you've got your threshold pace and maybe you do 4 times 2K. Well, suddenly you do 4 times 2K, that little bit above that threshold pace. And then actually towards the last few, they're that difficult that you kind of want to quit early, but you don't. You push through it. And that's what then starts to, push this pyramid up towards this is where your best potential race lies. If you don't have the foundation and you only do the harder stuff, you can't build a pyramid from the middle up. So you've got your upward, you're trying to get to the top of this pyramid, but if you just stack all the way up the middle, it'll fall over, it'll collapse, because you do need the foundation. But the danger is that you just get too comfortable in the steady running zone 2, zone 3. You cling to it. You get excited by the fact that it's getting quicker, but you've built the foundation, right? But you haven't really inflated your peak, right? So the peak of your pyramid is still down here, down at the foundation. And even though that's in a really good place, a really sexy place, and I am the world's worst at getting at the bloody brilliant position, higher than it's ever been before, faster than it's ever been before, but then I neglect pushing it upward. And what pushes it up? When you start to do those harder intense sessions, when you start to do that stuff that really starts to test you in training. Because let's make no mistake here, running is brutal, racing is brutal. And if you haven't done stuff like that in training, if you haven't pushed yourself to a place in training where you're thinking, I can't be asked, I don't need this, and then you're like, that's just those negative thoughts coming in. I love this, I want this, and you push through it, and you remind yourself it's okay, 1 lap at a time, 2 minutes at a time, 1 minute at a time, break it down to every 15 seconds, it doesn't matter. But you push through those negative emotions, you push through that little uncomfortable state, and a week later, you figure it out better, you deal with it better, because a lot of things have moved on. Physically, you've moved on, psychologically, you've moved on, and guess what? Your physiology has moved on. You're starting to bring that sort of pyramid to a better peak, and you're not just sitting down at this foundation stage. A lot of people are finding a lot of success in working on threshold paces, and they will improve that potentially really good race result that can come. But you must still at least once a week be working on those harder efforts, those more race-specific efforts. And that's something that I'm learning, I'm falling into sort of the trap of. I'm falling into this trap where, I go out there this morning, I'm in St. Moritz, I've flown from Flagstaff and now I'm in St. Moritz. I could have gone and done what I always do, 4 to 5 times 2K, kept the lactate at sort of 2, and all of a sudden I'm like, no, we'll do, and it was mile reps and then some 800s. And because I'm having to run the best part of 30 seconds per mile quicker than I would have done in, the sort of like 5:22 lactate type stuff, all of a sudden I'm running at 4:45 pace, 4:50, and it sucks. Honestly, it sucked. I think my exact quote after the first mile was, "This is hell on earth." Obviously it's not, but because I've neglected that stuff, because I haven't been doing that work, then I'm not used to it. So the effort feels really hard, but actually it's an effort that I can sustain for quite a lengthy period of time when I've put in the work, when I've built that capacity to be able to do that work, when I've got the psychology used to doing that work. And I thought this sort of YouTube was really important because there's so much information out there now about training. There's so much about this threshold, that threshold. As much as getting your threshold pace to a faster place is really important, you'll still be limited because threshold effort and threshold pace is never going to be the same as 5K pace or VO2 max pace. Your 78 minutes of hard work, you're sort of like 15 to 20 minute range, that harder stuff. And you can get addicted to just getting into this routine of, it's easy to just go do that 5 or 6 times 6 minutes at threshold. And runners have quite addictive personalities. So just be careful that you're not clinging to something because you're being stubborn, because you're desperate for it to work, because you've clung to it, because you've stuck to it. Now that I've started doing a mixture of harder sessions, a mixture of maybe some faster work, it just brought back memories of this is how I used to do it. This is how I trained in that build up to 209. This is how I trained in the build up to running 6108. This is the stuff that I was doing when I was 18, 19, 20 years of age. I'm bloody racing quicker over 10K and half marathon than I am now. When I was doing probably half the mileage that I've done now. When I wasn't doing altitude camps. When I wasn't as focused. This is the work that I was doing back then that pushed me forward. You're always trying to find what will help move you forward. You're always trying to find what gets your body going, what gets your psychology in a really good place, what tests you, so that on race day, you're not found out. So that on race day, you can handle that race better than perhaps you've ever handled it before. That's the bottom line. Start doing a mixture of training and see what makes you question running the most. See what makes you uncomfortable. Maybe you don't like long runs. Add in a long run. Maybe you don't like doing 10 times 400s at your VO2 max effort with maybe 60 to 75 seconds rest. Maybe you don't like being at that max effort. Maybe you don't like doing 5 times a mile at perhaps what you can currently race a 5K or a 10K in. That's going to be tough sessions. When you're starting to run at those sort of like efforts, those efforts above threshold, and because the reps are a bit longer, mile, 2 mile perhaps, suddenly it asks the question of the psychology, do you want this? And if you think about it, if everybody bloody else is doing threshold and you start getting good at not only doing threshold, but the other stuff that's going to move you forward, well then you've got the advantage. Think of your steady running, think of your threshold as building that foundation. But do not neglect the harder stuff that pushes that potential forward, that pushes that this is where my race potential is right now. This is where my race pace is at right now. Do not neglect it. Don't get addicted or stubborn to, I'm 2 weeks away from this working. I'm 3 weeks away from this working. But I've done it for that long now that I want to keep doing it. You know, get rid of that attitude. Fuck that attitude. It doesn't matter what you've done last week or the week before. It doesn't matter that you're clinging to it and you're desperate for it to work. Start figuring out what really helps you move forward and dedicate time to that. I hope you enjoyed that. We got merchandise on joggingclo.com, and as always, if you want, more tips, recovery, strength conditioning, nutrition, psychology, training plans for 10K, half marathon, joggingroom.com. You can check that out. Do like and subscribe. It really helps. And if you did enjoy that, comment below. If there's some topics you'd like me to cover, comment below, and have a lovely day.